Imagine the shock of watching someone physically collapse because they just got caught in a lie. That is exactly what happened when Prince William pulled out actual jeweler's documentation in a private family meeting. The entire story Camilla had been telling about Charlotte's pearl set completely fell apart in front of the king. Not over weeks, not over days. In the time it took to open a folder and place 2 pages side by side. And honestly, the part that makes this so much stranger is that Camilla didn't just lose the argument. She physically collapsed. Her body gave out before she could even form a counterpoint. Let's start with the room itself. This wasn't a public event. It wasn't a formal court proceeding. It was described as a private family review, which sounds very civil and procedural until you realize the people sitting around that table included 2 senior custodians whose entire job is knowing where every historic piece of royal jewelry is supposed to be. That detail matters. You don't invite custodians to a family chat. You invite them when there is a dispute about where something came from, about ownership, about whether someone has been moving things they shouldn't have been moving. William walked in with a cream-colored jeweler's file, which is not the kind of thing you bring to casual discussion. He placed it on the table. He said almost nothing at first. Then he opened the certification, turned it toward Charles, and revealed the sentence that changed the entire conversation. The pearls had never belonged to Camilla. Not recently, not provisionally, never. They were formally designated for Princess Charlotte through a documented family inheritance instruction. That's not the same as being set aside in a vault for general use. That's a named future recipient. Someone wrote Charlotte's name on a record years ago, and that record carried legal weight inside the household. Now when Camilla saw the certification, her first reaction was to laugh and call it an administrative mistake. That's a natural first defense. If someone hands you paperwork saying you can't have something you thought you could, your instinct is to question the paperwork. But here's where William's approach gets really methodical. He didn't argue with her. He didn't raise his voice. He simply removed the second page and placed it beside the first. The numbers matched. The jeweler's marks matched. The inventory references lined up perfectly. So now Camilla's administrative mistake explanation has to account for 2 separate documents from 2 separate sources, both pointing to the same conclusion. That's not a clerical error anymore. That's a pattern. And Charles, who had been watching this unfold, read the final paragraph once, then again. His fingers slowed. He lowered the page without speaking. And Camilla stopped looking at William entirely. She watched her husband instead because Charles wasn't challenging the evidence. He was accepting that it might be real, and that silence from him was apparently worse than anything William could have said. But the thing that keeps sticking with me is what happened next. William continued calmly explaining that the provenance file, which is basically the documented history of where an object came from and who controlled it, contained something more troubling than just a designation. There was a handwritten cross-reference connecting the pearls to an older royal inventory created before Charlotte was even born. Someone had later updated that record. Someone had deliberately added the young princess. So this wasn't a case where Charlotte's name appeared by accident or through some modern administrative convenience. Somebody made a conscious decision to attach her name to that specific pearl set in an older record. That's intentional. That's someone sitting down and saying this piece belongs to her eventually. Which means Camilla's claim that she didn't know, that no one warned her, becomes really hard to sustain because the notation didn't just exist in one place. It was added deliberately to a historical record. And when William revealed that, Camilla rose too quickly. Her face changed. She reached for the edge of the table, missed it, and collapsed back against the chair as Charles moved toward her. Catherine froze. William stopped speaking. And then one of the custodians broke the silence and said the jeweler's file was only the beginning. Another document existed, and that page explained why Charlotte had been chosen. Let's sit with that for a second. Custodian, someone whose entire professional role is maintaining accurate records, told the room there was more. Not speculation, not rumor, more documentation, and that documentation specifically explained why Charlotte was selected as the recipient. That's the kind of detail that transforms a jewelry dispute into something much more personal because it suggests the decision wasn't arbitrary. It wasn't just we need to assign this somewhere. There was a reason, and the reason was written down. And Camilla, sitting there recovering from a physical collapse, had to process that the pearls she wanted weren't just unavailable. They were deliberately promised to a child with documented reasoning, and that reasoning was about to be revealed. Now, before we go further, I need to explain something about how royal jewelry actually works. Because it's easy to hear pearl set and think we're talking about a necklace someone wears to dinner. But inside the palace, historic pieces carry enormous weight. They're not just accessories. They're symbols of continuity, of inheritance, of family memory. When a piece is designated for a specific person, especially a minor, it's not sitting in a drawer somewhere waiting to be claimed. It's protected. There are procedures, there are guardians, there are records, and access to those pieces isn't supposed to be casual. A royal can wear an item for an event without owning it. That's called ceremonial use. It's temporary. It doesn't change the underlying designation. But an inheritance instruction is different. That's a named person holding a future claim, and Charlotte's name was in that category. So when Camilla requested that the pearl set be moved from long-term family reserve into her personal ceremonial rotation, the distinction between those two categories became the entire conflict. Ceremonial rotation means the approved group of jewels available for repeated official use. It's not necessarily ownership, but it's regular access. And for a piece that's supposed to be held for Charlotte, regular access by someone else creates a problem. Not because Camilla would steal it, but because it blurs the line between temporary use and permanent entitlement. Once something is in your regular rotation, people start associating it with you. The next generation's claim gets weaker in practice, even if it remains strong on paper. And here's where the timeline gets genuinely strange. Months before William opened that jeweler's file, there was a quiet moment almost everyone dismissed. A palace jewelry review had ended late. Aides were leaving. Camilla remained behind with a senior wardrobe official and one handwritten inventory sheet. Nothing dramatic happened. No voices raised, no accusation made. But according to later records, that private conversation became the precise point at which Charlotte's pearls started moving towards someone else. Camilla asked the wardrobe official to move the pearl set from long-term family reserve into her personal ceremonial rotation before the next state occasion. She treated it like routine business, and at first it probably looked routine. Historic jewels were regularly checked for maintenance, insurance, storage, ceremonial use. Access requests passed through several hands. Camilla had worn pieces connected to earlier royal generations before, so the request itself didn't immediately appear unusual. But then the official noticed something written beside the inventory number. Charlotte's initials were already there. The official hesitated and pointed to the handwritten notation. She asked whether additional authorization might be required before any transfer could happen. Camilla looked at the sheet, paused, then said the matter would be clarified internally. She slid the paper back across the desk. No argument followed, but the silence afterward felt wrong. That's the moment the whole story turns. The official didn't process the transfer. Instead, she returned to the record later that evening and studied the notation again. She became increasingly worried that it represented an inheritance restriction rather than a storage code. So she copied the inventory number and privately sent it to the jewelers responsible for maintaining historic royal pieces. She asked for the original ownership documentation, and the answer changed everything. The jewelers matched the number to the exact pearl set. Their archived records matched the handwritten inheritance notation. Then came the discovery. A sealed family instruction named Princess Charlotte as the eventual recipient. The pearls had not simply been placed in reserve, they had been preserved for her. So now we have a documented chain. Charlotte's initials on the inventory, the jeweler's confirmation, a sealed family instruction. 3 separate sources all pointing to the same conclusion, and Camilla's request had already been made. The question wasn't whether she knew. The question was what she did after the official pointed out those initials, and according to the later record, she said the matter would be clarified internally and slid the paper back. She didn't ask to see the documentation. She didn't pause the request, she moved it forward. When William learned about the discrepancy, the wardrobe official personally brought the papers to his office. He read the inventory sheet once, then the jeweler's confirmation, and his expression hardened. He made his decision immediately. Camilla would not hear about the discovery through an aide, a memo, or Charles. She would hear it directly from him. And that's how we ended up at that family meeting with the cream-colored file on the table. Now here's what I keep coming back to. William spent the entire meeting speaking like an heir, controlled, procedural, calm. But then he pushed the jeweler certification toward Camilla and asked one question. If Charlotte's name was already attached to the pearls, why had she tried to place them inside her own ceremonial collection? And that's when he started speaking like a father, not a prince, not an heir. A father. He explained that ceremonial use and permanent entitlement were not the same thing. A royal could wear an item for an event without owning it, while an inheritance designation meant the named person held the future claim. Charlotte's name could not simply be brushed aside because someone wanted easier access. Charles raised a hand before the exchange could explode. He warned that family disputes over historic possessions could become destructive when emotion replaced procedure. The king wanted facts, not fury. But even he couldn't remove the personal weight from the room because this was no longer an argument about storage. It was about whether a granddaughter's documented inheritance had been knowingly challenged. And then William turned fully toward Camilla. He told her he could have accepted a misunderstanding. He could have accepted confusion over an inventory code. What he could not accept was someone continuing after Charlotte's name had already been noticed. That's the core of it. The initial request might have been a mistake, But once the official pointed out those initials, once Camilla saw the notation and said the matter would be clarified internally, the mistake became a choice. And that choice is what William couldn't forgive. Camilla snapped back. She said she had never tried to steal from a child and accused the prince of twisting a household request into a public humiliation inside the family. She insisted she had believed the matter still required clarification. Her voice hardened as she looked toward Charles, clearly expecting him to intervene. But William didn't retreat. He removed one final photocopy from the folder and placed it beside Camilla's hand. She stared at it but refused to touch the page. Instead, she pushed her chair backward, putting space between herself and the evidence. The notation was dated. The wardrobe official had recorded that Camilla was specifically informed that Charlotte's initials appeared beside the pearl set before the transfer request continued. That detail destroyed the safest explanation left. Catherine finally broke her silence. She asked one quiet question. If the warning had already been given, why had the request continued? Camilla opened her mouth, then stopped. Charles looked from the document to his wife. The king ended the confrontation there. He would review the original family instruction himself before any final decision was made. William had exposed the contradiction, but the final authority still belonged elsewhere. And Charles was now being forced to choose between protecting Camilla and honoring the document placed before him. When the shouting stopped, the most dangerous part began. Charles took the file away from the table and read it alone. No advisors, no family, no one to soften what the pages were telling him. Camilla had expected her husband to defend her. William expected the king to defend Charlotte, yet for nearly an hour neither received an answer. Behind one closed door, Charles faced a choice capable of wounding his wife or betraying his granddaughter. I don't think people fully appreciate what that hour must have been like. Charles understands the symbolic weight of royal inheritance better than almost anyone. He spent his entire life inside a system where objects carry meaning, where a piece of jewelry isn't just a piece of jewelry, but a statement about who belongs and who doesn't. And now he's sitting alone with documentation that says his wife tried to access something that was explicitly promised to his granddaughter, not recently promised. Promised years ago, before Charlotte was born, in an older inventory that someone deliberately updated. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a pattern of intention. And if Charles ignored it, he'd be sending a message that documented promises could be weakened by convenience, that his granddaughter's claim mattered less than his wife's comfort. But if he enforced it, he'd be publicly siding against Camilla, the woman he'd spent decades defending. The document itself made the choice even harder. It stated that the pearl set could not be permanently reassigned outside the designated family line without written approval from Charlotte's guardians while she remained a minor. The wording was direct. It left almost no room for interpretation. Then Charles found something else. A separate palace request carrying Camilla's household reference had attempted to move the pearls into a category that would have given her routine ceremonial access. She might still argue that she never intended permanent ownership, but the request had moved far enough to threaten the protection around Charlotte's inheritance. Charles closed the file. He did not call William first. He summoned Camilla alone. Camilla knew the answer before Charles finished speaking. His voice was too careful. The file remained closed between them, but its contents had already defeated every argument she intended to make. The pearls would be removed from her ceremonial options immediately. Charlotte's designation would be formally restored. Any future request involving the set would require William and Catherine's approval. And for the first time that day, Camilla did not fight back. Charles spoke slowly because he understood exactly what the decision meant. The jeweler's proof was sufficient. The pearl set would return to protected family storage under Charlotte's inheritance designation. He also canceled the earlier household request that would have allowed Camilla to use the pearls at future official appearances. No exception. Camilla listened without interrupting. Then she opened her handbag, removed the small handwritten note carrying the pearl's inventory number, and placed it on the table beside Charles. She did not look at him. She admitted that losing access to the jewelry was not what hurt most. What wounded her was knowing William now believed she had knowingly tried to take something intended for Charlotte. Charles did not give her the reassurance she wanted. He told Camilla that the warning notation should have stopped the request the moment Charlotte's initials were noticed. He refused to call it harmless confusion, and that refusal seemed to strike deeper than the decision itself. She had expected disappointment. She had not expected him to leave part of William's accusation standing. The consequences widened almost immediately. Charles ordered a review of several other jewelry access requests made during the same period, fearing the pearl dispute might have exposed weaknesses in how historic pieces were approved and reassigned. What had begun as one inheritance argument was now forcing the household to examine whether other records had been handled too casually. William received written confirmation shortly afterward. He read the decision, folded the note once, and placed it down without smiling. Catherine watched him closely. The prince had protected Charlotte's claim, but victory brought no satisfaction. Instead, he asked whether Camilla truly understood why the matter had become so serious. Catherine answered carefully. The pearls were secure, but the family was not. If anger remained untouched, every future meeting would carry this wound back into the room. She urged him to speak to Camilla privately. The private conversation that followed was different. No jewelers, no king, no advisors. William arrived carrying nothing, and Camilla immediately noticed the absence of the file that had shattered her composure hours earlier. This was no longer a hearing. It was personal. He sat opposite her and said Charlotte's name once gently. This time, Camilla looked away. William told her his anger had never truly been about jewelry. He kept imagining Charlotte years from now, old enough to understand what had happened, asking why something left to her had disappeared while her own father stood nearby and did nothing. That thought was what turned suspicion into fury. Camilla listened before answering. She admitted that her place inside the monarchy had sometimes felt less secure than people imagined. Important historic pieces had become symbols to her, signs that she had finally been accepted rather than merely tolerated. She knew how shallow that could sound, but the desire for recognition had slowly blurred her judgment. Then she admitted what William had been waiting to hear. Camilla had seen Charlotte's initials. She said she convinced herself the notation meant future consideration, not a binding inheritance designation. She acknowledged that she should have stopped and asked for clarity instead of allowing the request to continue. For William, that admission mattered because she was no longer challenging the evidence. William did not offer easy forgiveness. He told her plainly that Charlotte could never become leverage in anyone's struggle for royal standing. He accepted her withdrawal, but he did not pretend the trust between them had been repaired. Camilla asked for only one thing before he left. Someday, if William and Catherine permitted it, she wanted to tell Charlotte herself that the pearls had always been hers. William gave no promise, but he did not refuse. By the following morning, the story had escaped the palace walls. Yet what captured the public was not the value of the pearls. It was the image at the heart of the dispute, an older generation struggling over something that had already been promised to a young princess. Supporters saw William as a protective father. Critics saw a family dispute becoming brutally public. And outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered around a newspaper kiosk, where the Evening Herald carried a full front page declaring Charlotte's pearls restored beside an image of the young princess. When the paper was lifted toward television cameras, several people nearby began applauding. That single moment captured the mood better than any palace statement could. Palace communications confirmed only the central decision. The historic pearl set would remain under Princess Charlotte's designated family inheritance arrangement, meaning the pieces were formally protected for her future rather than available for unrestricted personal use. That simple confirmation mattered because it removed the argument from private emotion and placed it inside a clear principle. Written wishes would outrank convenience. William disliked the celebration that followed. He told Catherine that he did not want Charlotte growing up believing the pearls had caused a family war in her name. He had fought to protect her claim, but victory now felt strangely heavy. Catherine reminded him that their daughter deserved the inheritance without also carrying the bitterness attached to it. Camilla faced a very different morning. She read the coverage alone, and stopped when one commentary described the dispute as a battle between status and inheritance. She visibly flinched at those words because they reduced everything she had tried to explain into one brutal contrast. Charles understood the damage immediately. He approved tighter written procedures for historic jewelry linked to named future recipients, requiring clearer authorization before any piece could be moved into another royal's regular use. The safeguard mattered because the dispute had exposed how easily ceremonial access and future ownership could become confused. William welcomed the change, but he did not treat it as revenge. Camilla accepted that the new rules would apply to everyone, including her. Charles wanted one thing above all: no future family member should face the same uncertainty. In the end, there was no dramatic second claim, no hidden reversal, no last-minute intervention. The decision held. The pearl set was catalogued under Charlotte's name, sealed within protected royal storage, and removed from Camilla's future ceremonial selections. William watched the final paperwork being completed with none of the triumph others might have expected. The jewelers formally restored the set to Princess Charlotte's designated inheritance record. Catherine and her husband were listed as responsible guardians until their daughter reached the appropriate age. When the updated inventory page was signed, the prince checked Charlotte's name himself, placed the pen down, and quietly said no further action was necessary. Catherine felt relief, not victory. She told William that their daughter should one day receive the pearls without also inheriting the anger that had surrounded them. Protecting Charlotte had mattered, but turning that protection into permanent bitterness would defeat part of what they had fought for. Camilla made her own decision soon afterward. She signed the written withdrawal of her previous request and accepted Charles's ruling without another challenge. Her earlier collapse now carried a deeper meaning. It had marked the instant when confidence gave way to the realization that position alone could not override a documented family promise. Charles also accepted responsibility. In a private conversation with William, the king acknowledged that his delay in confronting the uncertainty had allowed tension to grow. He strengthened the approval process afterward, ensuring that historic pieces attached to named recipients could not be casually moved into another person's regular use. The monarch had chosen clarity where hesitation had once created danger. William and Camilla did not suddenly become close. Their relationship remained more guarded, but the private conversation between them prevented the dispute from becoming a permanent rupture. The prince accepted her withdrawal. She stopped contesting Charlotte's entitlement. That was enough to close the argument. Charlotte remained protected from the confrontation itself. One day she would receive more than pearls. She would inherit proof that a promise made in her name had been defended before she was old enough to defend it herself. The file was closed and archived. Charlotte's name remained on the page. Nobody challenged it again.